Today we're looking at two horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. As always, viewer discretion is advised. August 17th, 2014. Travis Bungum, 18 years old, set out with friends to find Lambert's cave in Minnesota. The plan was simple: explore an abandoned cave system that local explorers knew well, spend some time underground, and head home. It was supposed to be an adventure, a story to tell later. Instead, it became a fight for survival in complete darkness. The group arrived at the area where Lambert's cave was located. The entrance wasn't obvious. It required knowing where to look, understanding the local geography, recognizing the signs of an opening concealed by vegetation and terrain. They searched the area, moving through brush and rocks, looking for the telltale depression or opening that would mark the cave entrance. At some point during the search, Travis's friends left. The exact circumstances aren't entirely clear, whether they couldn't find the entrance and gave up, whether there was miscommunication, whether they assumed Travis would follow. What is clear is that they departed without ensuring Travis was with them, and they took all the proper gear and supplies. Travis was left alone in unfamiliar terrain, searching for a cave he'd never seen before, with nothing but his cell phone and 2 lighters. As darkness fell, Travis continued searching. He moved through the area, his cell phone providing minimal illumination, trying to locate the entrance his friends had been seeking. The transition from daylight to darkness made everything more difficult. Features that might have been visible in sunlight disappeared in shadow. Depth perception became unreliable. And the entrance to Lambert's cave, which experienced local explorers described as easy to identify and navigate, became an invisible trap in the darkness. Travis stepped forward and suddenly there was nothing beneath his foot. The ground gave way. He fell into the entrance shaft of Lambert's cave, his body dropping 20 feet, 6 meters, through the darkness before slamming into the bottom. The impact was brutal. His arm took significant damage, the bone fracturing from the force. His body scraped against rock during the fall, tearing skin and creating lacerations. He hit the cave floor hard, the breath knocked from his lungs, pain radiating from multiple points of impact. For a moment, Travis lay there in complete darkness, trying to process what had just happened. He had been searching for the cave entrance, and now he had found it. Or rather, it had found him. He was at the bottom of a 20-foot shaft with a fractured arm, cuts and bruises covering his body, and no way to climb back out without equipment or assistance. He pulled out his cell phone. In most caves, cell phone signals don't penetrate. The rock blocks electromagnetic radiation, making communication with the surface impossible. But Lambert's cave was an artificial cave, a former silica mine carved through St. Peter sandstone, and the specific geometry of the entrance shaft somehow allowed a signal to reach Travis's phone. It was an extraordinary stroke of luck, perhaps the only piece of good fortune in an otherwise catastrophic situation. Travis called his girlfriend. The conversation was brief and desperate. He explained where he thought he was, that he had fallen into a cave, that he was hurt and trapped. He needed help immediately. His girlfriend grasped the severity of the situation and prepared to contact emergency services. But then, Travis's phone battery died. The screen went dark, cutting off his only connection to the outside world. He was alone in complete darkness at the bottom of a shaft, injured with no light source except 2 cigarette lighters. The temperature in the cave was cold. Minnesota caves maintain relatively constant temperatures year-round, typically in the 40s or low 50s Fahrenheit, 4 to 10 degrees Celsius. Travis was not dressed for extended exposure to these temperatures. His body heat was leaching away into the cold stone around him. His fractured arm throbbed with pain. His cuts and abrasions burned. And he faced the very real possibility of hypothermia if he remained in these conditions for hours. Travis made a decision that would both save his life and nearly kill him. He began building a fire. He used his 2 lighters to ignite whatever combustible material he could find in the cave. Old wood, debris left from the cave's previous use as a mushroom-growing operation. Anything that would burn. The fire provided immediate warmth, heat radiating from the flames and driving back the cold that had been seeping into his body. But it also created a new and potentially fatal danger. Smoke from the fire began filling the cave. In an enclosed space like a cave, smoke has nowhere to go. It accumulates, rising to fill the available volume, creating a toxic atmosphere. The smoke irritated Travis's eyes and throat. Each breath brought particles into his lungs, damaging delicate tissues. More dangerously, the fire was consuming oxygen and producing carbon monoxide, an invisible, odorless gas that binds to hemoglobin in blood more readily than oxygen does, essentially suffocating someone from the inside while they continue breathing. Travis kept feeding the fire, burning everything he could find. The smoke built up. The carbon monoxide levels increased. He began drifting in and out of consciousness, not from exhaustion, but from carbon monoxide poisoning. His brain was being starved of oxygen, causing periods where he would lose awareness entirely, then snap back to consciousness, then fade again. Each time he lost consciousness, there was the risk he might not wake up again. On the surface, Travis's girlfriend had immediately contacted emergency services after their phone call. She provided what information she had about his location, but the critical problem was that she didn't know exactly where Lambert's cave was located. Travis had mentioned searching for it, but hadn't provided precise coordinates or directions. Rescue teams were mobilized, but they faced the challenge of finding an obscure cave entrance in a potentially large search area. The first responders recognized they needed expert assistance, someone familiar with Minnesota's cave systems, someone who knew where Lambert's cave was located and could guide rescuers to the specific entrance. They began calling the contact list for local experienced cave explorers. The timing was devastatingly unlucky. The incident occurred during the weekend of the Minnesota Speleological Society's annual corn feed gathering, a major event that drew virtually every serious explorer in the state. The event was being held in a deep valley where cell phone coverage didn't exist. Every name on the call-out list, except one, was at that gathering, completely unreachable by phone. The one person who hadn't attended the event had turned his phone off for the evening. Multiple attempts to reach him went unanswered. The rescuers had a victim trapped in a cave, potentially dying, and couldn't reach anyone who knew where that cave was located. Eventually, through persistent searching and possibly GPS data from Travis's last cell phone signal, the rescue teams located Lambert's cave. St. Paul firefighters arrived at the entrance and prepared for an underground rescue operation. They rigged ropes into the entrance shaft, prepared their equipment, and began the extraction process. What they found was a young man who had spent hours at the bottom of a shaft, injured and slowly being poisoned by smoke and carbon monoxide from the fire he had built to stay warm. Travis was conscious but in severe distress. His fractured arm required careful handling. His smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide exposure meant his respiratory system was compromised. His cuts and bruises covered much of his body. The firefighters worked efficiently despite the challenging conditions. The entrance that experienced explorers described as easy to navigate was less straightforward when extracting an injured person who couldn't climb on their own. But the rescuers had proper equipment, training, and most importantly, the ability to see what they were doing. Within a relatively short time, they had Travis secured and were pulling him up through the 20-foot entrance shaft. Travis emerged from Lambert's cave and was immediately transported to the hospital. Medical staff treated his fractured arm, cleaned and dressed his cuts and abrasions, and most critically, addressed the smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide poisoning. Travis's own words captured the desperation of his experience. The smoke built up. I was burning everything I could find down there. I was in and out of consciousness the entire time. And earlier, before the fire became a danger itself, I scavenged for whatever I could burn to start a fire for heat. I was trapped. I was fighting to survive. A Roaring River Cave, Missouri. 14th October 2002. The dive team assembled on the surface, preparing for a survey operation that would push deep into the underwater passages. Eric Hahn, 27 years old, had a dual role for this dive. He would place stage bottles at specific depths to support the deeper penetration and serve as safety diver for the team pushing to maximum depth. The plan called for precise coordination between multiple divers working at different depths, each with specific responsibilities that would ensure the survey's success and everyone's safety. The team consisted of experienced technical divers. Divers 1 and 2 would push the deepest, conducting the primary survey work. Hahn and Diver 3 would place equipment, stage bottles containing backup breathing gas at 130 feet, 40 meters, and 190 feet, 58 meters, creating supply caches for the deeper team's return journey. Additional team members would provide surface support and backup. Hahn prepared his equipment meticulously. He wore a rebreather, a closed-circuit system that recycles exhaled gas, removing carbon dioxide and adding oxygen to maintain a breathable mixture. Rebreathers offer significant advantages for cave diving. They produce no bubbles to disturb visibility. They extend dive time dramatically compared to open-circuit scuba, and they maintain optimal gas mixtures automatically. But they also require careful monitoring and understanding. The oxygen partial pressure, PO2, must be maintained within safe limits. Too low causes hypoxia and unconsciousness. Too high causes oxygen toxicity, which can trigger convulsions and death. Hahn also carried bailout cylinders, traditional scuba tanks containing emergency breathing gas if his rebreather failed. These cylinders were critical backup systems, providing a way to survive and exit the cave if the primary rebreather system malfunctioned. At 11:12 a.m., Hahn entered the water and began his descent into Roaring River Cave. The passages extended deep into Missouri's limestone bedrock, filled with crystal-clear water that allowed excellent visibility under normal conditions. He descended through the upper sections, following the permanent guideline that marked the route into the cave's depths. At 11:24 a.m., 12 minutes into the dive, Hahn reached the 190-foot, 58-meter tie-off point, where he was placing one of the stage bottles. A member of the deeper team, passing through on their way to maximum depth, interacted with Hahn briefly. Nothing seemed wrong. Hahn appeared to be working normally, handling the equipment placement with no visible signs of distress. The deeper team member continued past, heading down to their survey objectives. 1 minute later, at 11:25 a.m., something went catastrophically wrong. Hahn suddenly bumped into Diver 3. Not a gentle contact, but a hard collision that immediately communicated distress. Before Diver 3 could react or assess what was happening, Hahn began swimming upward rapidly. Not the controlled ascent of a diver managing their buoyancy, but the desperate, uncoordinated movement of someone in serious trouble. Diver 3 immediately followed, recognizing that Hahn was experiencing an emergency. Following a distressed diver is dangerous. Their movements are unpredictable. They may be unable to communicate, and whatever problem they're experiencing might worsen rapidly. But abandoning a dive partner in crisis isn't an option. Diver 3 chased Hahn upward through the water column. Hahn ascended until he hit the cave ceiling at 165 feet, 50 meters. The impact stopped his upward movement. Diver 3 caught up and was finally able to observe what was happening. Hahn was struggling with his rebreather loop, the breathing hose that connected his mouth to the rebreather unit on his back. Something was wrong with his breathing, and he was fighting to address it. Diver 3 reached for Hahn's bailout regulator, the emergency breathing gas from his backup cylinders. This was the correct response. If Hahn's rebreather was malfunctioning, switching to bailout would provide immediate access to breathing gas while they figured out what had gone wrong and began an emergency exit. But then Hahn did something that turned a manageable emergency into a fatal crisis. He pulled the rebreather loop completely out of his mouth and failed to close it. The loop, which should remain a closed system, was now open to the surrounding water. As Diver 3 attempted to insert the bailout regulator into Han's mouth and purge it to clear any water, Han began to convulse. The convulsions were violent and uncontrolled. Han's body shook and jerked, his muscles contracting involuntarily, his movements completely beyond his conscious control. This was an oxygen toxicity seizure, the terrifying result of breathing gas with too much oxygen at depth. At 165 feet, the partial pressure of oxygen in Han's breathing loop had exceeded safe limits, causing his central nervous system to malfunction catastrophically. Oxygen toxicity seizures underwater are often fatal. The diver loses all voluntary muscle control, cannot hold a regulator in their mouth, cannot control their buoyancy, cannot help themselves or communicate. They convulse violently, sometimes for minutes, completely helpless. If they're breathing water instead of gas when the seizure occurs, they drown within moments. Diver 3 attempted to get Han into a rescue position, a technique where the rescuer controls the victim's body and holds a regulator in their mouth, attempting to provide breathing gas and prevent drowning. But Han was convulsing too violently. His body jerked and twisted with such force that Diver 3 struggled to maintain any grip at all. The bailout regulator kept getting displaced from Han's mouth. Maintaining body position while wrestling with a convulsing diver required enormous physical effort. Both divers began sinking. Unable to maintain buoyancy while dealing with the crisis, they descended toward the cave floor. They reached 204 feet, 62 meters, 39 feet deeper than where the crisis had begun, pushing both divers well beyond their planned depth limits. Diver 3 continued attempting to assist despite the worsening situation, but the conditions were deteriorating rapidly. The struggle had stirred up silt, reducing visibility dramatically. In the chaos of the convulsions and attempted rescue, Diver 3 had lost contact with the guideline, the literal lifeline that marked the route out of the cave. Physical overexertion from wrestling with Han's convulsing body was depleting Diver 3's gas supply at an accelerated rate and increasing carbon dioxide buildup. The decision point came quickly. Continue attempting to rescue Han in conditions that were becoming too dangerous, likely resulting in 2 deaths instead of 1, or acknowledge that the rescue had failed and focus on survival. Diver 3 made the agonizing choice to abandon the rescue attempt. Diver 1 from the deeper team had already departed to get help, recognizing the severity of the emergency. As Diver 3 ascended, struggling with the emotional trauma of leaving Han behind, they encountered Diver 2 from the deeper team conducting a decompression stop at a shallower depth. Diver 2 immediately descended to attempt their own rescue, but the conditions that had defeated Diver 3 remained unchanged. Visibility was terrible from disturbed silt. Han was separated from the guideline, making him difficult to locate in the murky water, and Diver 2 experienced a PO2 spike, their own oxygen partial pressure rising to dangerous levels, threatening them with the same oxygen toxicity that had already claimed Han. Diver 2 was forced to ascend before succumbing to oxygen toxicity themselves. Diver 3 continued exiting and encountered Diver 4, another team member. Diver 4 ascended immediately to the surface and alerted the surface manager and authorities. A technical diving fatality was unfolding, and professional recovery resources needed to be mobilized. Diver 3 attempted to descend again to assist, driven by desperation and the hope that somehow Han could still be saved. But they met Diver 2 ascending, who delivered the devastating news. There was nothing more they could do to render assistance. Han was beyond help. They needed to complete their own decompression obligations and reach the surface safely before the tragedy claimed additional victims. At 11:35 a.m., just 10 minutes after Han had first shown signs of distress, Diver 4 descended to 58 feet, 18 meters, and observed Diver 3 ascending without Han. The surface manager was informed that the mission had transitioned from rescue to recovery. Eric Han was dead somewhere in the depths of Roaring River Cave. The surface manager made the critical decision to prevent any further rescue attempts. All team members were instructed not to attempt solo recovery, to complete their mandatory decompression stops, and to wait for professional recovery. divers from the Missouri Highway Patrol Technical Diving Unit to arrive. The team members had already been pushed to their limits, physically, mentally, and in terms of their gas supplies and decompression obligations. Additional improvised rescue attempts would likely result in more fatalities. The recovery operation began at 4 p.m., nearly 5 hours after Han's death. 2 teams of professional recovery divers entered the water, equipped and trained specifically for the grim work of retrieving bodies from technical diving environments. They navigated to the location where Han had been abandoned and located his body at 200 feet, 61 meters depth. The scene told the story of his final moments. His rebreather loop was open and out of his mouth, exactly as it had been when he pulled it free during the crisis. His 2 bailout cylinders still contained gas. He had emergency breathing gas available, but had been unable to use it during the convulsions. The bailout regulator was in his mouth with a slight free flow, evidence of Diver 3's desperate attempts to provide breathing gas during the rescue effort. His rebreather appeared intact and functional, aside from the open loop. The investigation and expert analysis revealed the cascade of errors that had killed Eric Han. The fundamental problem was gas selection and management. Han had apparently not fully understood his diluent and bailout gas compositions, and had violated the maximum operating depth of the gases he was breathing. Additionally, Han was adding considerable oxygen to his breathing loop, more than the automatic systems should have been providing. This manually added oxygen was pushing his PO2 dangerously high. When oxygen toxicity struck, it manifested as a grand mal seizure. His muscles contracted violently and uncontrollably. Even with Diver 3's heroic rescue attempts, the convulsions prevented maintaining a regulator in his mouth long enough to provide adequate breathing gas. For the team members who had attempted to rescue Han, the trauma extended far beyond the physical exhaustion and decompression stress. Diver 3 had held a convulsing friend while desperately trying to keep a regulator in his mouth, had felt Han's body jerking violently with seizures, had made the impossible decision to abandon the rescue when conditions became too dangerous, and had surfaced knowing they had left him to drown at 204 feet. That psychological burden would persist long after the physical recovery.